Here's something strange. The angriest driver on the road is rarely the first one to arrive. The person who interrupts every meeting. Nobody remembers their brilliant idea, just the interruption. There's a quiet truth hiding behind the people we admire most. They all share one unglamorous trait: patience. And not the boring, wait your turn kind your grandmother lectured you about. We're talking about a sharper, more strategic patience, the kind top athletes, successful entrepreneurs, and steady-headed parents use as a real competitive edge. Today we're breaking down why patience is a genuine superpower, how it rewires your brain, and how you can build it while picking up rich C1 English along the way. Let's get into it.
I'm really thrilled to be jumping into this topic today, honestly.
Yeah, I think it's a big one.
It is, because, we live in this environment that is just constantly, aggressively conditioning us against the very idea of waiting.
Right. Everything is instant.
Absolutely. Every single piece of technology we touch is designed to eliminate delay. But when you look at the trajectory of human lives, the ability to tolerate delay is, it's arguably the single most critical variable for long-term fulfillment.
That's a huge claim.
It is, but the science backs it up. So we're going to look really closely at this modern allergy to waiting. We'll get into the literal neurobiology of self-control.
Like what actually happens inside your skull.
Spot on. What happens inside your skull when you pause? And then we'll analyze the highly practical applications of this cognitive superpower in, your career, your relationships, all of it.
Awesome. And as we promised right at the top,
yeah,
we have a very specific secondary mission for this deep dive.
Yes, the language aspect.
Right. We know so many of you listening are looking to really elevate your English fluency, specifically reaching toward that advanced professional C1 level.
Which is such an important milestone.
It really is. So we're going to weave that learning naturally into our conversation. Instead of just, giving you a dry textbook vocabulary list, we'll be highlighting some incredibly expressive, high-level English words and idioms as they just naturally come up.
Yeah, terms like equanimity.
Yes, great word. Or phrases like distress tolerance and idioms like playing the long game.
And that contextual learning is just so vital. Having the specific vocabulary to describe a cognitive process actually helps your brain execute that process.
Wait, really? Just knowing the word helps you do it?
100%. It's a real psychological phenomenon. When you can accurately name a behavior or an internal state, you suddenly gain the ability to manage it.
Oh, wow. That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Right. So absorbing these C1 terms isn't just about sounding like polished or sophisticated in a boardroom. It's about providing your brain with the structural framework to literally understand and practice patience.
Okay, let's unpack this from the very beginning. We really need to start by looking at the water we're currently swimming in, so to speak.
The modern world.
Yeah, because we are living in an era completely engineered for instant gratification. And it's having a profound effect on our collective psyche.
It really is. Think about how our expectations have warped over just the last decade.
Oh, shipping is a great example.
Yes. 2-day shipping used to seem like a logistical miracle, right?
Yeah, like magic.
And now it feels unacceptably slow to a lot of us.
Totally. Or if you click a video and it buffers for 3 seconds.
Oh, you feel it.
You do.
Yeah.
There's a very real, very physical flicker of anger that happens right in your chest.
Yeah, your heart rate actually bumps up.
So we've essentially reached a cultural point where the very concept of waiting feels obsolete. And obsolete is a perfect C1 word to start with here.
It really is a great word.
So obsolete describes something that is no longer produced or used, something out of date. It's a practice that is simply no longer needed.
And that is the perfect descriptor for how modern society views a delay. Think about, the evolution of technology. A rotary telephone or a floppy disk is obsolete. Our modern, hyper-connected world treats the biological necessity of waiting as if it were a rotary phone.
Like it's just a glitch in the system.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like a primitive relic of the past that we should be able to just engineer completely out of existence. But the thing is, human psychology, emotional maturation, biological development, you can't just upgrade those overnight like a smartphone operating system.
You definitely can't.
We are forcing ancient brains to process a completely frictionless world, and the result is just chronic frustration.
Yeah, there's this incredibly relatable case study we looked at about a marketing manager named Maya living in Chicago.
Oh, right, the interview about her daily habits.
Exactly, right on the money. She confessed that she literally feels twitchy whenever a web page takes more than 3 seconds to load.
Twitchy. That's such a wonderfully visceral C1 vocabulary word.
It really is. It means feeling nervous, restless, or anxious in a highly physical, almost muscular way.
Yeah, when you hear someone is twitchy, you can almost picture her sitting at her desk, impatiently tapping her fingers on the mouse, shifting her weight around.
Jaw tightening up, yeah. And the neuroscientists who study our digital habits, they actually validate Maya's physical reaction.
They do. They explain that this constant, instantaneous digital feedback is subtly rewiring our neurological tolerance for any kind of delay at all.
What's genuinely fascinating here is the sheer neuroplasticity involved. Like, our brains are incredibly, almost alarmingly adaptable.
They really are. When you spend your entire day exposed to instantaneous feedback loops.
Right, like tapping a piece of glass in a movie instantly streamed.
Yeah, or you send a text and get a reply from across the world in 2 seconds. Or you order dinner and track the driver's car on a digital map in real time.
It's wild when you stop and think about it.
It is. And your brain fundamentally resets its baseline expectations. It learns a new rule. Action equals immediate visible reward.
So when that reward is delayed,
Even by a matter of seconds, the brain doesn't interpret it as a minor inconvenience. It interprets it as an error, a systemic failure.
wow.
That twitchy, uncomfortable feeling Maya gets, that's essentially her central nervous system sounding a high alert alarm because the expected immediate feedback loop has been violently broken.
So we're dealing with this massive fundamental mismatch in our daily lives. We are heavily conditioned for absolute immediacy, but if you look closely, all the truly deep, meaningful rewards in human life completely refuse to be rushed.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, think about mastering a new language to fluency.
Right.
Or building a sustainable business from scratch.
Cultivating a lasting marriage.
Yes. Or even physically healing from a severe injury. These things operate on their own stubborn geological timelines. You cannot force them.
No matter how much you yell at them.
Right. And because our daily environment constantly pushes us toward that cheap instant gratification, the capacity for genuine patience has become incredibly rare. It's just simply not our default setting anymore.
Which is undeniably the very reason it now functions as such a massive competitive advantage.
How so?
Well, if the vast majority of the population is abandoning a difficult project after 3 months simply because they aren't seeing immediate viral exponential growth.
Right, because they want the instant dopamine.
Exactly. Absolutely. The person who can quietly tolerate those slow, invisible, frustrating phases of development is going to win. They win almost by default.
Because they're the only ones left standing on the playing field when the results finally begin to compound.
Spot on. But I feel like we really need to clear up a major misconception right here at the start.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because when a lot of people hear the word patience, they immediately roll their eyes. They picture it as this incredibly boring, passive state of just sitting around doing nothing.
People often mistakenly believe that patience is synonymous with resignation.
Yes, resignation.
Let's define resignation as a C1 noun. It means accepting something unwanted or unpleasant without any resistance or fight. It's that heavy, defeated sigh of, well, I guess I'll just sit here in the waiting room and let life happen to me because I have no power.
Right, and what we're learning is that genuine strategic patience is the complete opposite of passivity. It's a highly active, energized state.
Active because you're actually doing work in your head.
Yes, it requires an immense amount of cognitive and emotional effort to tolerate a delay without falling into distress. That is a heavy psychological lift.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Resignation is throwing your hands up and giving up. Patience is planting your feet and holding your ground. When you're resigned to the bad situation, you mentally and emotionally disengage from it.
Do you check out?
Totally. When you're truly patient, you remain fully engaged with the process, but you intentionally detach your ego from the demand for an immediate, visible outcome.
Okay, I want to bring in this brilliant analogy from the material that perfectly illustrates this difference. The farmer.
Oh, I love this analogy.
Right. Think about a farmer who goes out in the early spring and plants hundreds of acres of seeds. She waters the soil, she checks the irrigation, and then nothing happens.
Nothing you can see anywhere.
At least nothing visibly happens above the surface of the dirt for weeks. But she isn't being passive. She isn't operating out of resignation, just sitting on her porch hoping for the best.
No, she's out there in the fields every single day.
Exactly. Completely. She's tending to the soil. She's painstakingly pulling weeds, checking moisture levels, monitoring weather patterns, looking for pests.
Nonstop work.
She is actively, tirelessly protecting the crop. But she operates with a fundamental acceptance of a timeline she cannot control. She knows she can't stand in the field and scream at the dirt to make the seeds grow faster.
That is a beautiful, vivid illustration of sustained effort harmonized with timeline acceptance. The farmer isn't sitting in her farmhouse ignoring the field.
Because that would be passivity or resignation.
Right. Nor is she out there digging up the seeds every morning to see if they've sprouted yet.
Which would be destructive impatience.
Absolutely. She's deliberately holding the tension between doing everything within her power and waiting for nature to do its part.
So how do we, in our modern lives, separate that genuine active patience from just merely enduring something terrible?
What do you mean?
Well, because I know I've been in situations, let's say, standing in a nightmare security line at a crowded airport during the holidays.
Oh, the worst.
Right. Where I am waiting, but I am certainly not being patient. I am aggressively gritting my teeth. My blood pressure is skyrocketing. I'm glaring at the security agents, and I am just white-knuckling my way through the delay. Am I being patient in that moment?
According to the psychological definition of the word, absolutely not.
Ouch. Okay.
You are exhibiting endurance, but you are completely lacking patience. And the critical difference between those two states comes down to another truly fantastic C1 vocabulary word: equanimity.
Equanimity.
Yes. Equanimity means maintaining mental calmness, composure, and an evenness of temper, especially in a highly difficult or stressful situation. It is that deep inner steadiness that remains entirely at peace while the wait is occurring.
Equanimity. I love how that word feels to say Equanimity. It even sounds balanced and calm.
It really does.
So if I'm gritting my teeth and my heart is pounding in that airport line, I have endurance. I am surviving it.
Barely surviving it, maybe?
Right. But if I am standing in that exact same chaotic line and I have internally accepted that the delay is out of my control, maybe I pop in my headphones to listen to a deep dive, or I just quietly observe the architecture of the building or the people around me without a shred of anger, then I have equanimity.
You've hit the nail on the head. Endurance is merely surviving the wait. Equanimity is living well within the wait.
Living well within the wait. That's good.
And this brings us right back to why patience is such a rare, highly cultivated superpower today. Our modern economy demands so much of our immediate attention and moves at such a blistering, unrelenting speed that cultivating this kind of equanimity feels almost countercultural.
It feels like a rebellion.
It really does. It requires you to actively push back against the synthetic panic of a fast-paced environment and intentionally choose to run on a slower, steadier internal rhythm.
So if patience is this active, cultivated skill, relying on true equanimity rather than just suffering through a delay, it makes you wonder where it actually comes from.
Like developmentally.
Yeah. Where do we first see it develop in human beings, and can we actually measure it in a meaningful scientific way? This naturally leads us to look at the developmental roots of restraint.
Which means we have to talk about one of the most famous experiments in the history of psychology.
Yes, we have to talk about marshmallows.
Ah, the famous marshmallow test. It is practically a mandatory discussion point anytime you explore the science of self-control, delay of gratification, or emotional regulation.
It really is, and for good reason. For any listener who might not be familiar with the specifics, back in the late 1960s and early 1970s, a psychologist at Stanford University named Walter Mischel conducted this incredibly elegant, deceptively simple experiment.
Very simple.
He brought young children, usually around 4 or 5 years old, into a sterile, distraction-free room, one by one. The child is seated at a small desk, and the researcher places a single, highly desirable treat in front of them.
Usually a marshmallow, though sometimes a pretzel or a cookie.
The researcher then gives the child a choice. They say, you can eat this one marshmallow right now, but I have to leave the room for 15 minutes. If you wait while I'm gone and you don't eat this marshmallow, I will give you a second marshmallow when I come back.
The archival footage of these experiments is absolutely priceless.
It's so funny.
It really provides a real-time, unfiltered window into the fundamental human struggle between immediate, visceral impulse and abstract, long-term reward.
It is both hilarious and genuinely agonizing to watch. Some kids just immediately pounced, like the researcher hadn't even fully closed the door and the marshmallow was already in the kid's mouth.
Zero hesitation.
None. But the children who actively tried to wait, the sheer psychological agony written on their little faces is incredible. And what's so interesting is that they didn't just sit perfectly still.
No, they got really creative.
They used all these inventive little strategies. Some covered their eyes tightly with their hands so they physically couldn't see the marshmallow. Some started singing loud, repetitive songs to themselves.
Just trying to drown out the temptation.
Right. Some literally pick up their chairs and turn them around to face the blank wall. Some kids even started gently stroking the marshmallow like it was a tiny pet.
Or leaning down to smell it without letting their lips touch it.
Yes, just trying to somehow befriend the temptation instead of consuming it.
They were instinctively deploying sophisticated cognitive distraction techniques. And the reason this particular study became a cornerstone of modern psychology isn't just because of the entertaining video footage.
It was the follow-up, right?
Spot on. It was the longitudinal follow-up. Decades later, researchers tracked down these exact same children as teenagers and then as adults. They found a striking correlation.
What did they find?
The children who were able to successfully delay gratification in that room, the ones who held out for the full 15 minutes and earned 2 marshmallows, tended to have measurably better life outcomes across the board.
Like in what areas?
They had higher academic test scores, better social relationships, lower rates of substance abuse, and significantly higher stress management capabilities in adulthood.
Okay, I have to jump in and push back here for a second because whenever this study gets brought up in pop culture, it feels a bit too tidy.
I hear you.
And then later, researchers and sociologists heavily debated the conclusions of this study. Many have pointed out that a child's family background, their socioeconomic status, and the environmental stability of their home play a massive overriding role in these life outcomes.
Absolutely. That's a major point of discussion now.
For instance, if you grow up in a chaotic home environment where food is sometimes scarce, or where promises made by adults are frequently broken, eating the marshmallow immediately isn't a failure of willpower.
Right. It's actually the opposite.
Yeah, it's the most logical, highly rational survival choice you can make. You take the guaranteed calorie in front of you because you don't trust the adult to actually return with the second one.
A bird in the hand, essentially.
So does this test really measure some pure, isolated trait called willpower? Or does it primarily measure a child's baseline privilege and environmental trust?
That is an exceptionally sharp critique, and modern psychology has fully embraced that exact nuance. You are entirely correct. The socioeconomic context and a child's lived experience undeniably shape their baseline trust in any kind of delayed reward system.
So the study is flawed.
Well, not exactly flawed, but maybe interpreted too simply at first. However, the ultimate value of Mitchell's study, and the reason cognitive researchers still study it so closely today, isn't about the specific statistical correlation to adult SAP scores or income levels.
Oh, okay. What is it about then?
The true lasting value of the experiment lies in how it revealed the actual mechanism of patience.
When you say mechanism, I imagine you're talking about the actual cognitive tools those kids were using in the room.
Right.
Not just their raw ability to suffer through the wait, but what they're actually doing inside their heads to trick their brains into holding out.
Right on the money. Think closely about the children who succeeded in waiting the full 15 minutes. They were not necessarily born with some mystical, genetic, innate gift of pure willpower.
Oh, innate. Let's define that one. Innate, by the way, is a fantastic C1 adjective, meaning something that exists from birth, something inborn or entirely natural.
Perfect. Yes, pure willpower is not entirely innate. The successful children didn't just sit there staring at the marshmallow with ironclad innate discipline. They actively used tools.
Like covering their eyes.
Exactly. They distracted their sensory inputs. They manipulated their physical environment by turning the chair. Most importantly, they learned to reframe the temptation.
Reframe is another excellent C1 vocabulary word we should lock in. To reframe something means to look at a situation, a problem, or an emotion from an entirely new, more helpful perspective, effectively changing its meaning.
Yes, and that is what the successful children did. Later interviews with kids who passed the test revealed that they would actively imagine the marshmallow wasn't a real, edible thing.
What did they think it was?
They would pretend it was just a plastic toy, or a picture of a marshmallow, or a fluffy white cloud. They intentionally altered their cognitive relationship to the object in front of them.
Wow. They hacked their own brains.
They did. That is the true empowering takeaway of the marshmallow test. Patience is not a fixed innate personality trait that you are either magically born with or completely lack. It is a built skill.
That's incredibly reassuring.
It relies heavily on tangible, teachable strategies like sensory distraction and cognitive reframing. The logic is incredibly hopeful. If a 4-year-old child can invent a strategy on the fly to regulate their most primal impulses, an adult can certainly learn and refine those same strategies.
That completely flips the script. We aren't just at the mercy of our genetics or our natural temperaments. We can actively build the skill.
We have agency.
And realizing that patience relies on these tangible cognitive strategies naturally makes me wonder, what is physically, biologically happening inside our heads when we use them? It's not just magic, it's biology.
Very much so.
Which brings us to a fascinating part of our deep dive, the actual neurology of pausing. We need to look at how we are physically rewiring the brain.
This is where behavioral psychology transitions beautifully into hard, observable biology. Patience is not just a moral philosophy or a vague character trait. It is a highly measurable electrical brain function.
And when we look at the brain scans, this function is primarily centered in the prefrontal cortex.
The command center.
Right. For anyone looking to master high-level English, prefrontal cortex is a great C1 level scientific phrase. It refers to the highly evolved region at the very front of the brain, right behind your forehead, that is responsible for complex planning, long-term decision-making, and regulating social behavior.
You can think of it as the rational CEO of your brain.
The executive control center. Now, beneath that rational CEO, nestled deep in the older, more primitive structures of the brain, you have a network often collectively referred to as the limbic system, or the emotional brain.
Which includes the amygdala.
Yes, the amygdala. This region is ancient, incredibly fast, and highly reactive. This is where your immediate, survival-based, impulsive urges originate.
So, to put this in a real-world context.
Yeah, give us an example.
Okay, when you get an infuriating, condescending email from a colleague who completely misunderstood your project.
Oh, I hate that.
Right. And you immediately feel that hot flush of anger in your face, and you get the overwhelming, burning urge to hit reply all and just scorch the earth with a vicious response.
Yep, I know the feeling.
That is your emotional brain, your limbic system, firing off.
Without a doubt, my emotional brain is rapidly reacting to a perceived social threat. It's generating an impulsive urge.
Impulsive.
Yes, impulsive is a great C1 word meaning acting, or done without forethought, driven entirely by immediate emotion or instinct. My emotional brain doesn't care about my long-term career. It just wants me to attack or defend instantly to neutralize the immediate threat.
Right. But then, if you are practicing patience, hopefully your inner CEO, the prefrontal cortex, wakes up and steps in before you hit send.
Yes, the prefrontal cortex intervenes in milliseconds. It sends a literal inhibitory electrical signal down the neural pathways to the emotional center.
Like slamming on the brakes.
Basically. It essentially shouts, wait, hold on, let's think this through. If we send this angry email right now, what happens tomorrow morning? What happens to our professional reputation next month?
So patience, at a strict neurological level, is simply the prefrontal cortex successfully inhibiting and overriding the limbic system.
It's a literal, measurable electrical intervention.
Here is where this science gets deeply empowering for me. I love the analogy that compares these mental acts of self-restraint to physical exercise.
Oh, the push-up analogy.
Yes. Every single time you pause before firing off that reactive email, with reactive being a strong C1 word for responding to a stimulus, often highly emotionally, rather than acting with deliberate, conscious choice. Every time you stop a reactive impulse, you are essentially doing a patience push-up.
A patience push-up. It's a brilliant way to conceptualize neuroplasticity.
Think about it like going to a neurological gym. Every time you hold your tongue during an argument, every time you deliberately choose not to pull your phone out of your pocket in an elevator, every time you take a deep breath instead of laying on your horn in traffic,
Getting a rep in.
you are firing electrical signals along the neural pathways connecting the prefrontal cortex to the emotional brain. And because of neuroplasticity, the more you fire those specific pathways, the more the brain reinforces them with a substance called myelin.
Myelin.
Yeah, it's an insulating layer. You are literally building and insulating that circuitry, making it faster and stronger, exactly like building a bicep muscle.
If we zoom out and look at the implications of this, it is a deeply hopeful message, particularly for people who have spent their whole lives considering themselves naturally impulsive or genetically hot-headed.
Oh, totally. The fundamental rule of neuroscience is that neurons that fire together wire together.
Fire together, wire together.
When you consistently, intentionally choose to pause, you physically thicken those inhibitory pathways. Over time, you are literally shifting your neurological baseline.
Let's make sure we define baseline. As a C1 noun, a baseline is a starting point, a standard level, or a minimum level of something used for comparison.
Spot on. By doing those daily patience push-ups, you incrementally raise your baseline for calmness.
So a stressful situation that would have triggered a massive, uncontrollable emotional explosion a year ago.
Might only cause a mild, manageable irritation today.
Why? Not because the situation is less annoying.
Right, the guy cutting you off in traffic is still annoying.
Yeah.
But because your prefrontal cortex is physically stronger, more heavily myelinated, and vastly more efficient at regulating that impulse, you are fundamentally upgrading your brain's hardware.
Okay, so we understand the biology. Once we have put in the reps and strengthened this neural muscle, how does it actually translate into a tangible, measurable advantage in our daily lives?
The practical application?
Yeah, because it's great to have a robust prefrontal cortex, but what does that actually buy me in the real world? Let's start by looking at where we spend the vast majority of our waking adult lives, the workplace. Let's examine the quiet, massive career advantage of patience.
This is the arena where we clearly see patience transition from a nice personal virtue into a ruthless, competitive professional strategy.
I was struck by the story in the material about Daniel. He's a software engineer working in a highly competitive tech hub.
Oh, Daniel's story is classic.
Daniel spent 18 grueling months working on a new software product. 18 months of coding, testing, and pitching. And for almost that entire duration, the product showed absolutely zero early traction.
Let's look at traction as a C1 business term. It means the extent to which an idea, a product, or a startup gains growing progress, market acceptance, or a solid customer base.
And Daniel's product had flat zero traction.
Which, if you know anything about the culture of modern tech startups, is an incredibly uncomfortable, precarious place to be. The pressure to abandon ship is immense.
Extremely uncomfortable. Meanwhile, all his peers and colleagues were constantly hopping from project to project. The moment their project stalled, the moment momentum, another vital C1 word meaning the forward-moving force, energy, or speed of development, the moment momentum slowed down even slightly, his colleagues abandoned their work to chase the next flashy, exciting idea.
They wanted the instant dopamine hit of a new launch.
Exactly, they just couldn't handle the waiting. But Daniel stayed put. He kept iterating.
Let's highlight iterating for our language learners. As a C1 verb, to iterate means to repeat a process, usually with the specific aim of refining it, making small, incremental improvements each time based on real-world feedback.
Daniel just kept iterating. It wasn't glamorous. He talked to a handful of frustrated users. He tweaked the underlying code. He refined the user interface. He fixed tiny bugs. He did this quietly for a year and a half.
Just grinding away.
And finally, the product caught on. It found its niche audience and eventually exploded in popularity and profitability.
But the core lesson here is crucial. It wasn't a lucky overnight break.
No. He succeeded because he was the only developer still standing there when that slow-building momentum finally hit the tipping point. Everyone else had moved on because they lacked the distress tolerance to handle the slow phase.
Daniel possessed the emotional distress tolerance to endure the long, boring, anxiety-inducing periods of invisible progress. We see this specific behavioral pattern absolutely everywhere in the professional world.
Give us another example.
Think about high-stakes negotiations. The most patient negotiator in the room almost always wins.
Why is that?
Because most human beings simply cannot endure the awkward, heavy, agonizing silence that follows a bold offer. They get anxious, they rush to fill the silence by talking, and in doing so, they often negotiate against themselves or offer unnecessary concessions just to relieve the tension.
Oh, wow.
The patient negotiator just sits there, maintaining their equanimity, letting the silence do the heavy lifting.
You see it in leadership and management, too. Patient managers don't demand instant, miraculous turnarounds from the struggling employee. They're willing to invest time in mentoring, fully knowing that the payoff for that effort is 6 or 9 months down the road.
Absolutely.
But this raises a huge, very practical question for me, and I bet it's on the minds of our listeners too. How do you implement this kind of strategic patience without just becoming a passive doormat?
That's a great question.
If a business project is legitimately failing, or an employee is deeply toxic and dragging the team down, you can't just be infinitely patient. That's a recipe for disaster. How do you know the difference between highly strategic patience and just cowardly refusing to face reality?
That is the critical distinction that separates successful people from martyrs. Strategic patience is never about blind loyalty to a sinking ship. It is intrinsically tied to the concept of playing the long game.
It's play the long game. This is one of our key target idioms for today. To play the long game means making decisions for long-term benefit and sustainable, lasting success. even if it requires sacrificing short-term comfort, immediate profits, or quick visibility.
Yes. And playing the long game requires objective data. Daniel wasn't just sitting in a dark room stubbornly hoping his software would magically sell itself.
He was actually working on it.
He was actively iterating, he was gathering user feedback, he had a core thesis about what the market needed, and the slow, incremental progress was validating that thesis, just at a vastly slower rate than his peers were comfortable with.
So the data is key.
Yes. If the data clearly showed the product was fundamentally flawed and nobody wanted it, a strategic player pivots. They quit. But if the data says this is incredibly hard, the growth is painfully slow, but we are moving forward, you have to have the emotional fortitude to write it out.
Write it out, another incredibly useful idiom. To write it out means to endure a difficult period or a highly stressful situation without attempting to change it forcefully or run away from it, trusting that it will eventually pass or resolve on its own. You write out a storm.
Daniel wrote out the 18 months of low traction.
The success in his career is what we would call a slow burn, an idiom meaning a situation, an emotion, or a success that develops gradually, quietly, and steadily, rather than exploding overnight.
If we look at the ultimate example of this slow burn approach, financial researchers often point to Warren Buffett, arguably the most famous and successful investor in modern history.
Oh yeah, the Oracle of Omaha.
His entire investment philosophy is a masterclass in the slow burn. He buys fundamentally sound, undervalued companies, and then he simply waits. He aggressively ignores the daily frenetic panic of the stock market ticker.
He's not day trading.
No, he doesn't trade on emotion. He relies entirely on the mathematical certainty of compounding.
Let's look at compounding as a C1 vocabulary word. It means increasing gradually by adding to itself, where the additions also produce further increases over time, just like compound interest in a bank account.
Buffett's legendary wealth isn't derived from timing the market perfectly or chasing rapid trends. It is derived almost entirely from his immense psychological capacity to sit on his hands and let compounding do its invisible work over decades, while other, less patient investors panic sell during every minor economic dip.
And this professional superpower isn't just about the work itself. It's heavily about managing the people doing the work. Patient professionals manage workplace friction so much more effectively.
Friction is a great concept here.
Yeah, friction, used in this C1 professional context, doesn't just mean physical objects rubbing together. It means interpersonal conflict, tension, or difficulty between people, departments, or systems.
When a high-stakes project inevitably goes sideways, an impatient person instantly introduces more friction into the system. They panic, they yell, they rapidly assign blame, they send the reactive defensive email.
Adding fuel to the fire.
A patient professional intentionally pauses. They absorb the initial shock without immediately passing it on to their team. Over a span of 5 or 10 years, that consistent habit builds an unshakable golden reputation for emotional maturity.
Makes sense. Ultimately, people want to work with, promote, and invest in the person who doesn't panic when the building catches fire.
100%.
Okay, so we can clearly see how this tolerance for slow, compounding results builds wealth and stellar careers. But the stakes are arguably even higher when we take this exact same neurological mechanism out of the office and bring it home to our families.
Oh, definitely.
Let's look at how patience functions as the ultimate relational glue, specifically through the immense power of generous interpretations.
If workplace patience is primarily about strategy, data, and compounding results, relational patience is fundamentally about tenderness and emotional safety.
Tenderness, I like that word for this.
It acts as the vital shock absorber that protects human intimacy from the daily grind of life.
There is this wonderful anecdote about Anna and Marcus, a couple who have been happily married for over 20 years. When friends asked Anna about the secret to their longevity, she didn't talk about expensive romantic vacations or complex communication therapy frameworks.
What did she say?
She talked about a very simple, very strict internal rule she created for herself, which she calls her 15-second rule. Whenever Marcus says something that deeply irritates her, maybe an absent-minded, thoughtless comment or a sarcastic joke, right when she's feeling highly stressed, Anna literally forces herself to physically close her mouth and wait 15 seconds before she responds.
Now, 15 seconds might sound trivial in the grand scheme of a day, but 15 seconds is an absolute eternity when you are actively furious with someone.
It really is. For anyone listening, try literally counting to 15 in your head the next time your partner or your roommate says something infuriating. 1, 2, 3. It feels like an hour.
It's agonizing.
But Anna noted that this tiny deliberate pause acts as a vital, necessary buffer between the stimulus, which is Marcus's annoying comment, and her verbal reaction. She estimates that implementing this one simple rule has saved them from probably 1,000 unnecessary, deeply escalating arguments over their 2 decades together.
What Anna is doing from a neurobiological perspective is utilizing her prefrontal cortex to override the emotional brain's desperate demand for immediate verbal retaliation.
She's doing a patience push-up.
Spot on. In those critical 15 seconds, the initial blinding surge of adrenaline and cortisol peaks in her bloodstream and actually begins to rapidly subside.
So the physical anger literally passes.
Yes, the peak passes. It buys her the cognitive space to ask rational questions. Is this comment worth ruining our evening over? Is he actually attacking my character? Or is he just incredibly tired and hungry from work?
It perfectly applies to the intense world of parenting, too, which might actually be the most demanding, relentless arena for this kind of patience.
No, parenting is the ultimate test.
Imagine managing a toddler who is having a massive screaming meltdown in the middle of a quiet grocery store, or dealing with a moody teenager who just screamed at you and slammed a door in your face. Navigating those moments without losing your mind requires staying deeply grounded.
Let's unpack grounded. As a C1 adjective, being grounded means being emotionally stable, highly sensible, and deeply unshakable, even when the circumstances around you are chaotic or aggressive.
When your toddler's screaming at the top of their lungs because you won't let them eat a raw potato,
Which happens.
your emotional brain is screaming back, "Make this noise stop immediately." But staying grounded means you can tolerate the child's intense, unpleasant emotion without escalating the situation.
Escalating, another vital C1 word.
It means making a bad situation significantly more intense, serious, or severe.
When a parent manages to stay grounded in the face of a tantrum, they are doing something incredible. They are physically modeling distress tolerance for the child.
Like showing them how it's done.
Yes. They are demonstrating in real time that difficult, ugly, overwhelming emotions can exist in a shared space without destroying the relationship or causing the adult to fall apart. Because the child's brain is still developing, the patient parent essentially acts as an external prefrontal cortex for the child.
Providing the calm, steady regulation that the child simply hasn't developed the neural circuitry to do for themselves yet.
Exactly. Or rather, absolutely.
But let's be completely real and honest with our listeners for a second. We have all been in these situations. It is incredibly, remarkably difficult to hold your tongue or bite your tongue.
2 very common, very evocative idioms.
Right. They mean to force yourself not to say something you desperately want to say, usually because saying it would make a bad situation much worse. When you have repeated a simple instruction to your teenager for the 5th time and your patient is wearing thynium, an idiom meaning you're becoming deeply annoyed and are on the very edge of losing your temper, biting your tongue feels like actual physical torture.
It truly does. It takes immense energy. And that is why it is so helpful to use specific cognitive tools to make biting your tongue easier. One of the most powerful relational tools is embodied in the idiom to give someone the benefit of the doubt.
To give someone the benefit of the doubt. This means intentionally choosing to believe something good about someone's character or assuming their underlying intentions were positive, even when you aren't entirely sure and they might actually be wrong.
Highly patient people naturally default to generous interpretations of other people's behavior.
Give us an example of a generous interpretation.
Consider a simple scenario. A close friend hasn't texted you back in 2 days. An impatient, highly reactive mind immediately assumes the worst possible narrative.
She's actively ignoring me.
She's mad at me. She doesn't value our friendship anymore. I'm going to send her a passive-aggressive text to confront her.
We've all been there.
But a patient mind, armed with equanimity, gives the benefit of the doubt. She is probably just incredibly overwhelmed with that new project at work. I'll just check in gently tomorrow and see if she needs help.
That one generous interpretation completely changes your own biological response. You don't get angry, you don't flood your own body with toxic stress hormones, and most importantly, you preserve the relationship instead of initiating a baseless conflict.
Yes, the patience here isn't just a cold, calculating strategy to get what you want. It is a profound act of tenderness and grace toward another human being's inevitable flaws.
Which leads us directly into understanding the hidden, insidious cost of failing to use these tools. We've seen how failing to utilize that 15-second pause damages our careers and fractures our intimate relationships. But the science reveals that chronic impatience also inflicts measurable, sometimes devastating physical damage on our own biological bodies.
This is where it gets scary.
We really need to examine exactly why impatience hurts us. This aspect of the research was a genuine wake-up call for me. In our culture, we often brush off impatience as just a quirky personality trait. We say things like, oh, I'm just a type A, fast-paced person. I hate waiting. I like to get things done.
Like it's a badge of honor.
Yeah. But medical researchers describe chronic impatience as a state of simmering frustration. Simmering is a brilliant C1 word. Think of a pot of water on the stove that is just barely below the boiling point. It means a state of low, highly controlled, but constant and relentless intensity.
If you are constantly irritated by slow Wi-Fi, slow drivers, slow cashiers, and slow elevators, you are essentially living your entire life at a simmer.
And biologically speaking, living at a simmer is incredibly exhausting for your organism. Every single time you feel that minor flicker of irritation at a red light, your body releases a microdose of stress hormones.
Primarily cortisol and adrenaline, right into your bloodstream. It's a low-level fight-or-flight response.
And over years and decades, that constant simmering drip of stress chemicals elevates your resting blood pressure, creates systemic inflammation, and significantly increases cardiovascular risk factors.
Let's lock in cardiovascular, a C1 adjective relating specifically to the heart and the blood vessels. So what we're saying is that being constantly impatient is literally medically bad for your heart.
It is the cumulative wear and tear of constant biological friction. The physical world rarely moves at our preferred, idealized, hyper-fast pace.
It never does.
If your emotional distress tolerance is very low, you are spending your days constantly fighting reality. And reality always wins.
You've mentioned distress tolerance a few times now, and it is a vital C1 phrase we need to fully understand.
Let's dive into it.
It refers to a person's psychological ability to withstand emotional discomfort, pain, or negative states without immediately needing an escape route, and without trying to forcefully or destructively fix the situation.
Think about two different drivers stuck in the exact same massive traffic jam. A person with high distress tolerance can sit in that gridlock and rationally say, well, this is incredibly annoying, I'm going to be late, but it is entirely out of my control.
They accept the reality.
They turn on a podcast and their heart rate remains completely normal. A person with low distress tolerance sits in that exact same traffic jam, grips the steering wheel until their knuckles turn white, curses at the windshield, and their body enters a full fight-or-flight physiological state.
They are biologically trying to fight and escape a reality they cannot escape, and their heart takes the damage.
I think we absolutely have to mention catastrophic thinking in this context. It's another highly relevant C1 phrase, meaning the cognitive tendency to instantly assume the absolute worst possible outcome from a very minor setback.
Oh, catastrophic thinking is so common.
I have to admit, I notice this deeply in myself. If my home internet goes down 5 minutes before a crucial Zoom meeting, my lack of distress tolerance immediately jumps to catastrophic thinking. My brain says, I'm going to miss the meeting, my boss is going to think I'm completely unreliable, I'm going to get fired, I won't be able to pay my mortgage, I'll be living in a tent.
All because of a router glitch.
Yes, it is a rapid, terrifying psychological spiral. And it illustrates the core point. Impatience essentially guarantees a life of continuous, exhausting friction.
Patience physically protects us by removing that friction. It literally stops the surge of toxic stress chemicals because you are no longer fighting the delay. You accept it with equanimity.
So the stakes for mastering this are undeniably high. We now know that patience physically thickens and protects our prefrontal cortex. It accelerates our careers through the power of compounding. It saves our marriages with the 15-second rule. And it literally keeps our cardiovascular system ticking smoothly.
It is a highly underrated life skill.
Underrated being a C1 word for something that is not valued, praised, or appreciated nearly as highly as it deserves to be.
But this brings us to the million-dollar question.
How do we actually build it? If I am naturally a twitchy, fast-paced, easily frustrated person, how do I actually change my neurobiology? Let's dive into the masterclass. 5 highly practical, evidence-based strategies to build patience.
These strategies are drawn directly from cognitive behavioral therapy and neuroscience, and what I appreciate most is how incredibly practical they are.
You don't need to quit your job and retreat to a silent monastery on a mountaintop to meditate for a decade.
No, you can start rewiring your brain today during your normal commute.
Let's get right into it. Strategy number 1 is remarkably simple. Name the feeling.
This raises a very important question regarding how we manage our own internal silent dialogue. In clinical psychology, this specific technique is known as affect labeling.
Affect labeling. That's a powerful C1 psychological phrase. It is the process of explicitly naming an emotion in order to reduce its intensity.
Here is how it works in practice. When you are standing in a slow-moving line at the coffee shop, and you start to feel that tight, restless, buzzing sensation in your chest, you don't just blindly stew in the anger.
You don't just let the simmer turn into a boil.
Right. You intentionally, explicitly say to yourself in your head, I am feeling impatient right now. I am experiencing frustration.
I have to ask, why does just naming the emotion help? It honestly sounds a bit too simple to be effective.
It sounds simple, but the neurology behind it is profound. Functional MRI studies show that the act of actively searching for the precise word for your emotion forces your brain to shift blood flow and electrical activity away from the highly reactive emotional center, the amygdala, and up into the prefrontal cortex, where complex language is processed.
Oh, really?
Yes. You are literally, mechanically pulling the metabolic energy out of the emotional fire in order to power the analytical, linguistic part of your brain. It creates a crucial microscopic gap that instantly lowers your emotional heat.
That is absolutely incredible. It is a biological hack achieved simply by using vocabulary. You're using words to physically move blood around in your brain.
It's amazing.
Okay, moving to strategy number 2. Reframe the weight. We touched on reframing earlier with the kids in the marshmallow test, imagining the treat was a cloud. The strategy here involved intentionally changing the internal narrative from "this delay is a massive waste of my time" to "this delay is a unique opportunity."
It is entirely about taking back your psychological agency. If you view a traffic jam or a delayed flight purely as something being done to you, you feel like a helpless victim.
And feeling helpless inevitably breeds deep resentment and anger.
But if you intentionally reframe that delay as found time, unexpected time to organize your thoughts, time to listen to a new audiobook, or even just time to sit quietly and observe the architecture of the airport terminal around you, you instantly put yourself back in the driver's seat. You are in control again.
Strategy number 3 is definitely my favorite on the list. Practice in low-stakes situations. I love to think of the grocery store checkout line or waiting for a slow computer to reboot as a training dojo.
A training dojo, that is a brilliant way to contextualize it.
Think about physical fitness. You don't walk into a gym on your very first day and attempt to bench press 300 pounds. You would crush yourself. Similarly, you shouldn't expect to have perfect Zen-like equanimity when you suddenly get passed over for a major promotion at work or when you find out your house needs a massive repair.
You have to start small.
Exactly. When you are stuck behind a painfully slow driver on a Sunday afternoon, you shouldn't get mad. You should realize you have just entered the training dojo. This is a low-stakes environment. You do a patience push-up, you practice your affect labeling, you consciously relax your jaw.
You build the neurological muscle where the outcome doesn't really matter.
So that the muscle is strong and ready when you eventually face a real career setback or a highly emotional argument with your spouse.
That is how you build a reliable, elevated baseline. You have to deliberately put in the small reps. Strategy number 4 is closely related to preparing for those bigger moments. Visualize the bigger picture.
Sports psychologists note that elite athletes and high achievers constantly use a cognitive technique called future self visualization.
Yes, they do.
Walk us through how that actually works in practice. How do I visualize my future self when I'm just annoyed in the present?
Let's say you are spending your weekends studying for a highly difficult professional certification exam. The material is dense, your progress is agonizingly slow, and the frustration is making you want to quit entirely.
You're in the slow burn phase.
Right. You stop and you consciously, vividly imagine yourself 6 months from now. You picture yourself holding the physical certificate, feeling a deep sense of pride, having secured a much better job with a higher salary. You emotionally connect your current, deeply frustrated self with your successful, relieved future self.
This vital connection helps to contextualize the current discomfort. Let's define contextualize. It is a C1 verb, meaning to place a word, an event, or an idea into a much larger setting or perspective in order to understand its true significance fully.
By actively visualizing the future, you contextualize the present struggle. You realize this frustration isn't a permanent state of endless suffering. It is merely a temporary, highly necessary chapter in a much longer narrative of success. It gives the pain a purpose, which makes the weight incredibly bearable.
That brings us to the final strategy, number 5. Surround yourself with patient people.
This strategy taps directly into the science of mirror neurons and social conditioning. Human emotional states are highly, dangerously contagious.
Contagious, really.
Oh, absolutely. If you spend 40 hours a week working with colleagues who panic at every minor software glitch, who send reactive, aggressive emails, and who constantly complain about every slight delay, your own neurological baseline for anxiety and impatience will inevitably rise to match theirs.
But the reverse must also be true. If you intentionally surround yourself with leaders who naturally play the long game, people who stay deeply grounded during a crisis, their equanimity literally rubs off on you. You unconsciously start to adopt their measured pacing and their generous interpretations.
Without a doubt. As social creatures, we automatically calibrate our nervous systems to the people in our immediate vicinity. If you want to be patient, you must choose your company very, very wisely.
So what does this all mean for us as we navigate our lives today? Let's bring all these threads together for our conclusion. We have covered massive intellectual and biological ground today.
We really have.
We have thoroughly established that true patience is never about passive resignation or giving up. It is a highly active, trainable, measurable neurological function housed directly in our prefrontal cortex. It operates as a quiet, nearly invincible superpower in a society that is hyperfast, easily distracted, and obsessively addicted to instant gratification.
We have seen clear evidence of how it yields massive compounding professional success for people who are willing to iterate and ride out the slow phases.
We have explored how the 15-second rule and the willingness to give the benefit of the doubt act as the essential relational glue that protects marriages and stabilizes parenting.
And we learned that actively practicing distress tolerance and utilizing tools like affect labeling, literally, physically protects our cardiovascular health by stopping that simmering, toxic, chronic frustration.
Patience isn't just about being polite or having good manners. It is a fundamental biological survival skill for the modern era.
It is the ultimate competitive advantage, mostly because so few people are willing to endure the initial discomfort required to cultivate it.
So I want to leave you, our listener, with a direct call to action. I want you to reflect on your life right now. Think of one specific situation that is actively testing your patience today. Maybe it's a creative project at work that just isn't gaining any traction. Maybe it's a family member whose behavior is driving you absolutely crazy. Maybe it's a personal health or fitness goal that is moving at a frustrating snail's pace.
Just pick one.
What would genuinely change if, instead of fighting that weight, instead of clenching your jaw and aggressively white-knuckling your way through the days, you decided to actively practice patience within it? What if you took a breath, labeled the feeling, reframed the delay as a training dojo, and tapped into your own deep equanimity?
The shift in your own internal daily experience of life would be profound.
It really would. Because one of the most deeply transformative, lasting achievements of your entire life won't come from forcing yourself to do more, or moving faster, or shouting louder, but from learning, quite deliberately, to wait well. I want you to really think about that the next time you find yourself stuck in traffic or watching a screen buffer. Before we let you go, if you found real value in this deep dive into the mind, and you want to keep building your linguistic and mental superpowers with us every week, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. It helps us keep creating these in-depth explorations for you. We will see you on the next deep dive.